It's a weapon of pure contradiction. Forged in the fires of World War I, it was the tool that gave American soldiers a critical edge in the muddy trenches of France and the dense jungles of the Pacific. It was carried by heroes, men who won the Medal of Honor by using its thunderous power to save their comrades and turn the tide of battle. Its distinctive report became a sound of hope for allies and a sound of pure fear for its enemies. For over 40 years, it was the backbone of the American infantry squad, a symbol of righteous military might. But this hero's weapon had a dark side, a secret life lived in the shadows. During the desperate years of the Great Depression, it armed a new kind of domestic enemy. It became the weapon of choice for gangsters and outlaws, men and women who terrorized America's heartland. In the hands of notorious figures like Clyde Barrow, the Browning automatic rifle was transformed from a soldier's shield into a gangster's sword, a tool of chaos that outgunned law enforcement at every turn. So how did one of America's greatest battlefield weapons become the favorite tool of its most infamous criminals? This is the secret history of the Browning automatic rifle. To really get the story of the BAR, you have to go back to the defining conflict of the early 20th century, World War I. By 1917, the war in Europe had bogged down into a brutal, bloody stalemate. Millions of men were dug into a massive, zigzagging network of fortified trenches stretching from the Swiss Alps to the North Sea. And the undisputed king of this battlefield was the machine gun. Set up in interlocking fields of fire, these weapons made any charge across the blasted no man's land a suicide mission. The tactical problem was staggering. Generals on both sides kept ordering massive frontal assaults, sending waves of men over the top, only to see them mown down in seconds. What they desperately needed was a new kind of weapon, something that could bridge the gap between a heavy, static machine gun and a soldier's slow, bolt-action rifle. The idea was called walking fire, a weapon light enough for one man to carry while advancing, but with enough firepower to suppress enemy machine guns and let his squad move forward.
When the United States jumped into the war, its army was critically unprepared for this reality. To fill this massive firepower gap, the American Expeditionary Forces first bought weapons from their French allies. The main gun they got was the show-shot M1915. On paper, it looked okay. In reality, it was a total disaster. The show-shot was badly made, jammed constantly, and its flimsy design was a terrible match for its cartridge. American troops, who were handed about 16,000 of them, grew to hate the weapon, finding it completely unreliable in the hellish conditions of the trenches. The show-shot's failure wasn't just an inconvenience, it was getting soldiers killed and creating an urgent need for a real American-made solution. The answer to that desperate call came from a modest workshop in Ogden, Utah, and from the mind of arguably the greatest firearms designer in history, John Moses Browning. Browning was a quiet genius whose impact on modern warfare is almost impossible to overstate. By 1917, he'd already designed legends like the Colt 1911 pistol and the M1917 water-cooled machine gun. He was a master of mechanics who thought in steel and springs, and he'd been tinkering with the idea of a portable automatic rifle since 1910. With America entering the war, his project suddenly became a top priority. In early 1917, Browning showed up in Washington, D.C. for a demonstration that would make history. In front of a crowd of high-ranking military officials, he unveiled two revolutionary weapons, his heavy M1917 machine gun and a lighter, sleeker automatic rifle. The demonstration was a massive success. Both guns worked flawlessly, but it was the automatic rifle that really blew the audience away. It was exactly what the Army had been dreaming of. Chambered in the powerful .30-06 Springfield cartridge, the same one used in the standard infantry rifle, it fed from a 20-round detachable magazine and could unleash about 550 rounds per minute. It weighed around 16 pounds, heavy for today, but light enough then for a single soldier to carry and operate.
After the demonstration and more successful tests, the Ordnance Board unanimously recommended it for immediate adoption. The Browning Automatic Rifle, or BAR, was officially born. On July 16, 1917, the U.S. Army placed an urgent order for 12,000 BARs from Colt's, the company that held Browning's patents. But there was a catch. Colt's was already running at full capacity, cranking out Vickers machine guns for the British, and couldn't start right away. The wartime demand was just too great to wait.
So the U.S. government brought in the Winchester Repeating Arms Company as the prime contractor to get the BAR into production fast. Winchester's engineers tweaked Browning's prototype for mass production, making one small but crucial change. The original design ejected spent cartridges straight up, which wasn't great for the shooter. Winchester redesigned it to send the hot brass flying out to the right, a simple but smart improvement for the soldier in the field. As the war effort kicked into high gear, a third company, Marlin-Rockwell, was also brought in to make the rifle. Together, these three giants of American industry began a race against time. Marlin-Rockwell hit an incredible pace, at its peak producing 200 BARs every single day. By July 1918, Winchester alone was making 9,000 rifles a month. The industrial might of America was fully unleashed, forging the weapons so desperately needed on the front lines. The first shipments of the M1918 BAR arrived in France in July 1918. One of the men tasked with introducing it to the troops was none other than U.S. Army Lieutenant Val Browning, the inventor's own son. He wasn't just a representative, he was a soldier who personally carried the BAR into combat and gave hands-on training to the doughboys who would use it. Although the rifles arrived in July, General Pershing deliberately delayed their deployment, fearing the game-changing design could be captured and copied by the enemy. The weapon's official combat debut finally happened on September 12, 1918, with the 79th Infantry Division. The impact was immediate. After the nightmare of the show shot, the BAR was a revelation. It was reliable, powerful, and gave American squads a level of firepower their enemies just couldn't handle. It was almost instantly called an unqualified success as a combat arm. Soldiers quickly learned to pick out the BAR's unique sound. Firing the big 30-06 round at a thunderous 550 rounds per minute, its powerful report struck fear into German soldiers. The weapon only saw action in the final bloody months of the war, but it proved itself beyond any doubt. In fact, its performance was so impressive that the French military, desperate to get rid of their hated show shot, immediately put in an order for 15,000 BARs. A hero was born. The BAR wasn't just a new rifle, it gave the U.S. military a whole new way to fight. It was officially integrated as the Squad Automatic Weapon, or SAW, and it completely changed infantry tactics. Army doctrine was rewritten around what the BAR could do. A standard 9-man squad was now built around a single BAR gunner who provided the unit's base of fire. Tactics were designed to maximize its power. In defensive positions, bars were placed on the flanks to create deadly fields of crossfire. During an advance, they were positioned at the front and back of the column, ready to unleash overwhelming firepower at a moment's notice. While the concept of walking fire was part of the original idea, it turned out to be less practical than using the bar as a mobile support weapon. The weapon was so effective and so sought after that U.S. Marines who hadn't been issued the rifle yet were caught trading their own gear to Army units just to get a bar. The practice got so out of hand that a formal order had to be issued demanding the Marines give the bars back to the Army. By the end of the war, about 52,000 bars had been delivered, and the rifle had cemented its place as the heart of American infantry firepower. When the Great War ended, the nation entered a period of massive change. The Roaring '20s gave way to the Great Depression, a time of desperation that fueled a new, brutal crime wave. Gangsters like John Dillinger and Pretty Boy Floyd became household names. They were ruthless,
mobile and heavily armed. And this is where the Barr's story takes a dark turn. While the Thompson Tommy gun gets all the attention in the movies, the Barr was the real king of firepower in the gangster era. Clyde Barrow of the infamous duo Bonnie and Clyde especially loved the Barr. He got his first ones by raiding National Guard armories. Barrow immediately saw the weapon's terrifying advantage. In the 1930s, law enforcement officers were usually carrying .38 caliber revolvers and shotguns. They were completely, hopelessly outgunned. The Barr's powerful .30-06 round could rip right through the steel car bodies of the era, which were basically bulletproof against police handguns. It could punch through brick walls and the primitive body armor of the day. Clyde's gang raided at least 2 more armories in Illinois and Oklahoma to get more Barrs and thousands of rounds of ammunition. This firepower gave the Barrow gang an almost unbelievable edge, allowing them to shoot their way out of at least 5 major gunfights with police, even when they were outnumbered. When they were finally gunned down in a bloody ambush in 1934, their car was a rolling arsenal. Inside, lawmen found 3 fully automatic Browning automatic rifles, an incredible 100 loaded 20-round Barr magazines, and 3,000 extra rounds of ammo. The very weapon designed to bring peace to the battlefields of Europe had become a symbol of terror on the dusty backroads of America. The hero had become an icon for villains. As the world spiraled toward another global war, the Barr was called back to service. But warfare had changed, and the Barr had to change with it. The result was the M1918A2, the version that would become iconic in the hands of GIs and Marines across Europe and the Pacific. The A2 model had several big changes. A bipod was added to the front for more stable fire, and a hinged butt plate helped with control. But the most significant change was to the fire controls. The original semi-automatic option was removed entirely. In its place was a rate reducer that gave the gunner 2 full auto settings, a slow rate of 300 to 450 rounds per minute and a fast rate of 500 to 650. This sacrificed precision for sustained fire, a major tactical shift. A heat shield was added, and eventually a carrying handle was fitted to make the now 20-pound weapon a little easier to lug around. Even with these upgrades, the Barr still had 2 key limitations. Its barrel couldn't be quickly changed, which meant it could overheat, and its 20-round magazine was tiny compared to German machine guns like the belt-fed MG42. Still, in the hands of a good soldier, it was a formidable weapon. U.S. Marine squads in the Pacific often carried 2 or even 3 Barrs, a huge boost in firepower that proved decisive in brutal jungle fighting. The weapon was so feared that German troops were trained to target the Barr gunner first in any firefight, a grim testament to its power. The Barr's incredible service didn't stop when Japan surrendered. When American troops were sent to Korea in 1950, the M1918A2 went with them. Once again, the rifle proved its worth, especially its legendary reliability. In the brutal sub-zero cold of the Korean winter, many other automatic weapons froze up and failed. The Barr just kept running. During the desperate fighting retreat from the Chosin Reservoir, where U.S. Marines were surrounded and outnumbered in punishing Arctic conditions, the Barr was one of the few automatic weapons that still functioned reliably. Its rugged, simple design, a product of John Browning's genius, allowed it to endure conditions that lesser weapons couldn't. It continued to serve as the main squad automatic weapon through the entire Korean War, a remarkable feat for a design that was already over 30 years old. The BAR even saw some limited use in the early days of the Vietnam War, mostly with South Vietnamese forces. By then, however, its time was clearly running out. The military needed a true light machine gun with a quick-change barrel and a bigger ammunition capacity, which led to its eventual replacement by the M60 machine gun in 1957. After nearly a half-century of service, the BAR's incredible career was finally coming to a close. The BAR has one of the most fascinating legacies in firearm history, playing the part of both decorated war hero and notorious gangster icon. What do you think was its most defining chapter? The trenches of WWII, the back roads with Clyde Barrow, or the jungles of the Pacific? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy digging into the secret histories of iconic firearms, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next video. The story of the Browning automatic rifle is the story of America in the 20th century. It's a story of innovation, of heroism on the battlefield, and chaos on the home front. It was a weapon designed by a genius to solve a specific problem, and it did so brilliantly, serving with distinction across decades and continents. It was a lifesaver, a weapon that got soldiers and Marines out of impossible situations and helped shape the course of history. Yet, it also carries a darker legacy. It represents a time when the nation was at war with itself, when desperate men used the tools of modern warfare against their own society. The BAR is a stark reminder that a weapon is just a tool. Its character, whether heroic or villainous, is ultimately defined by the person holding it. From the hands of a Medal of Honor recipient to the hands of a public enemy, the BAR played both roles, carving its dual identity into the pages of history and securing its place as a true American legend.